You ask me if I think religion can be reconciled in a pluralistic society. I say the only religion that can be reconciled with pluralism is paganism. As I understand neo-paganism, the concept is that most ancient religions were developed by people in awe of nature. They created this concept of the gods to help them internalize and contemplate on that wonder. They created rituals and ceremonies as a form of rote methodology to connect them to the cyclic nature they saw in the universe and in their own lives. Incantations, prayers, runes, it's all just a way of trying to communicate and commune with nature. To harness their own internal powers, and to realize that connectedness. Temples, pyramids, mosques, churches, it's the majesty of architecture and man's ingenuity manifested for self, for community, and for the Godhead. In paganism, all religion is the same, and all paths do lead to the same ultimate place. That part of religion I respect and have no problem with. But I also realize and recognize in myself that I don't need the trappings of religion. I don't need to name nature God. I don't need to worship something that has no wants and demands no personal attention. Besides, there are other commonalities in all religions as well. Commonalities which I do have a problem with. One is that they all glorify suffering and sacrifice. Voluntary starvation, flagellation, cutting, immolation. These are supposed to bring one closer to God. Buddha, Gandhi, Mother Teresa all glorified suffering, called it noble. Hinduism has dietary laws. Judaism and Islam have dietary laws. Catholicism has dietary laws. Why? Because sacrifice is supposed to be favored by God. The ancients began by making offerings to their gods, food which they themselves needed to survive. They left out at altars. They went hungry. Their children went hungry. In time, they decided that the sacrifices weren't enough. The gods were not appeased by mere platters of fruit and roots. Soon they began to sacrifice livestock. Eventually, almost every religious civilization in the history of man has turned to some form of human sacrifice. Some executed their criminals as a sacrifice to their deity. Some slaughtered prisoners captured in battle. Some murdered virgins, or children, or babies. But the main things all religions have in common, and that I find repugnant, is this idea that they alone have somehow found the path to enlightenment. But as I see it, if you're brainwashing yourself by rote recitation of anything, whether it be the rosary, hours on a prayer route, or simply saying Om over and over, all the while starving yourself, giving up your valuables and your friends and your freedoms, eventually your mind is going to succumb to something it considers a connection to the divine. But that's not God. That's human psychology. That's endorphins and other hormones. That's manipulated emotion and desperation. But hey, if that's what you want for yourself, I'm fine with it. You can be a monotheist, a polytheist, a henotheist, or a deist, and I won't care one lick. Just don't try to tell me that's what I should be. Don't tell me the path you found is the truth. Don't tell me that your path's rules should be my rules. Your subjective morals should be my objective morality. Don't ask me to bow to your idols, be they concrete images, plastic icons, or mental projections. I won't do it because I know the place it comes from, and it's all BS to me. As for Christianity, it misses the mark on so many levels it's embarrassing. Dualism? Really? Trinity? Come on. And do any of you who call yourselves Christians really know the history of your own faith? As for pluralism and Christianity, no. The concepts are not compatible. The reason being the history of the religion. It's all there in your book. The story of Genesis was stolen and co-opted from the Sumerians. The traditions they practiced became Hebrew tradition. The early Hebrews were henotheistic. They believed there were many gods, but that one God, the main one, had entered into a contract with them. The males would just sacrifice. There it is again. A little of their manhood at birth, in a truly barbaric and homoerotic ritual. At that point, they began moving toward monotheism. Their history tells how at each setback, some prophet would say they had moved away from the covenant, and that is why they suffered. Each time they became a little more monotheistic and a little less connected to the spiritual roots of their nature-based origins. Eventually, a small cult developed in Judaism which was Messianic. Messianic thought was never mainstream Judaism. Some members of this cult declared a Messiah and tried to argue that the fall of Israel under the Romans was due to not adhering to the new message from their prophet, Jeshua ben Joseph. They spread his message, which he had co-opted from other self-proclaimed prophets, including Apollonius, John the Baptist, maybe Zoroaster. And their followers turned it into a game of telephone, changing the message as they went, so it comported to the socio-economic and political climates of the discordant regions they carried it to. Eventually, it found its way to Constantine, and after him to Theodosius, the first, who ordered it the state religion, blended in elements of Sol Invictus, stories that had previously belonged to the cult of Apollo, and other significant pagan ideas, had the whole thing codified in Nicaea, and Catholicism was born. And Catholicism was not henotheistic in the slightest. There have been schisms, but few were based on the henotheistic philosophy. In Christianity, there's one God. In Christianity, your traditions are belong to us. All your bases are belong to us. Druidic trees, there's a Christian app for that. Winter festivals, there's a Christian app for that. Fairies? No, you mean angels. Sprites? No, you mean demons. Tartarus? You mean hell. Valhalla? You mean heaven. What about the role of women? Whores of Babylon all, except for this one. And don't bother to tell me how your Christian church allows women to have a role. You still read from Ecclesiastes at your weddings. You still teach that Eve was made from Adam's rib as a helpmate to him. You still hold up 13 men as the ideal, and the one woman you revered was only good because she denied her sexuality. Your women folk still glory in their suffering. It all goes back to that covenant the Hebrews entered into when they agreed to trim their peckers for Yahweh, he who shall not be named. So while I personally like and appreciate the idea of pluralism, I don't see any way to reconcile it with actual Christianity, nor with any other Abrahamic